My name is Tufik Baklini. I'm the president of In Defense of Christians, IDC, a nonprofit 501c3 organization that's committed to the protection and preservation of Christianity in the Middle East. I want to thank our guest speakers for their collaboration with us today. I would also like to thank our Director of Government Relations, Christina Olney, and the Director of Media Relations, Ninar Kairouz, for helping us to organize today's event. As Pope Francis declared early this year, a genocide is taking place and it must end. Religious minorities in the Middle East, including Christians, are suffering unimaginable atrocities, and the US must respond, and all crimes that have been committed by the right name, genocide. Before we hear from our expert panels to discuss this important topic, we're going to hear from our Member of Congress, Congressman Chris Smith, who is the chairman of the House Foreign Relations Committee, Subcommittee on Africa, Global Health, Global Human Rights, and international organizations. Congressman Smith.
President Baklini, thank you for organizing this extraordinarily important event and for everything IDC is doing to stand in solidarity with our Christian brothers and sisters in the Middle East. I was hoping that we would be joined by Congressman Frank Wolf, Chairman Wolf, but he is under an ethics rule that precludes him from being with members of Congress on an event like this. But I think it's important to remember Frank Wolf is a modern-day William Wilberforce. For 34 years in Congress, Frank Wolf spoke boldly, persuasively, and eloquently on behalf of persecuted believers around the world. The landmark International Religious Freedom Act of 1998 remains one of Frank's many historic legislative achievements. That law and his continued advocacy shines a bright light of religious intolerance on religious intolerance anywhere and anytime religious bigotry manifests its ugly tentacles. We are likely to move in January on a reauthorization and expansion of the IRFA, International Religious Freedom Act. I've introduced it, and we named it after this champion, Frank Wolf, and it is so fitting because he, again, has been speaking out on behalf of the Christians as well in the Middle East, and certainly in Iraq and Syria. We are here today because ISIS continues to commit genocide against Christians, and because the White House is considering a public genocide declaration that would exclude, I say again, would exclude Christians. Last week, I convened a subcommittee hearing to explore ISIS violence against Christians, Yazidis, and other religious and ethnic minorities, and the humanitarian needs of these communities. It was indeed powerful to hear Mirza Ismail, founder and chairman of the Yazidi Human Rights Organization International, testify, and I quote him in pertinent part. "I am here today," he said, "to speak of preventing the annihilation by ISIS of my people, the Yazidis, and the Chaldo-Assyrian Christians in Iraq and genocide. Both Christians and the Yazidis," he said, "face this genocide together. And what has happened to the Yazidis and the Chaldo-Assyrian Christians in Sinjar and in the Nineveh plain is nothing less than genocide," close quote. Chaldean Bishop Francis Calabat testified and said, "I wish to note that the Obama administration, including President Obama himself, have neglected to mention that the ISIS atrocities were committed against Christians, atrocities of rape, killings, crucifixions, beheadings, hangings that Syrian and Iraqi Christians have endured, and they are intentionally omitted. There are countless Christian villages," he went on to say, "in Syria who have been taken over by ISIS and have encountered genocide, and the Obama administration refuses to recognize their plight." I would note parenthetically that about 3 years ago, I chaired a hearing on the persecution of Christians in Syria, and it was made very clear that the administration was not doing its due diligence to include and to robustly respond to these horrific killings, which again now have risen to genocide. When genocide, later on you'll hear from Dr. Greg Stanton, one of the world's leading experts on genocide and foremost practitioners in combating it and holding perpetrators accountable. Dr. Stanton testified at our hearing last week and said, and I quote, "The clearly documented facts on the ground and our country's treaty obligations under the Genocide Convention require that our government include Christians as victims of genocide. When genocide has been committed or is looming, the President and Congress should publicly say so and take robust actions to end it and to ensure accountability. Too often, weak words have been used to justify weak action or outright indifference." On August 7, 2014, as ISIS was sweeping across Iraq, and President Obama authorized airstrikes to protect the Yazidis on Sinjar Mountain, Secretary Kerry stated that ISIS's, and I quote him, "campaign of terror against the innocent, including Yazidi and Christian minorities," again, he said Christian minorities, "and its grotesque and targeted acts of violence bear all the warning signs and hallmarks of genocide." President Obama added that we can act carefully and responsibly to prevent the potential act of genocide, close quote. Almost a year and a half later, this is the closest the administration has come to openly acknowledge that ISIS has actually committed genocide and that Christians are among the victims of that genocide. And I would suggest respectfully that there is absolutely nothing potential, to use the president's word, about the genocide being waged against Christians and Yazidi. It's a fact. Any failure, I would submit, by President Obama to recognize the ongoing genocide against Christians would be absolutely irresponsible, indefensible, and unconscionable.
Thank you very much, Congressman Smith, for that very motivational introduction to today's topic. And thank you, Tufik. I'd also like to thank again our panelists for taking time out of their very busy schedules to come together in order to show a strong coalition of solidarity on this issue, a coalition which we believe stretches across political boundaries, religious boundaries, ethnic boundaries that make up the American population today. I'd also like to mention very quickly a number of organizations who are here in support of this initiative, and yet who were not able to sit on the panel today, and that is the Philos Project, the Nineveh Council of America, A Demand for Action, Christian, Arab, and Middle East Churches Together, the Armenian National Committee of America, and the Southern Baptist Ethics and Religious Liberty Commission. So thank you all also for being here today and for supporting us. Why the G word matters. After years of heightened sectarian violence in Iraq and Syria, in the summer of 2014, we all witnessed as ISIS ravaged Mount Sinjar and the Nineveh Plain of northern Iraq and Kurdistan, the ancestral homelands of the ancient Yazidi and Christian communities of Iraq. Hundreds of thousands of innocent civilians fled for their lives, only to become displaced persons and refugees in other lands. Meanwhile, others were murdered, kidnapped, raped, and suffered other unspeakable atrocities. Churches and monasteries were razed to the ground. Religious leaders were executed. Christians and other religious minorities who did not escape were left with unimaginable options, if any at all, such as conversion to Islam or death. In August of 2014, the Iraqi parliament decried these atrocities and crimes against humanity of ISIS, calling the targeted persecution of religious minorities under ISIS a genocide. In the year that has followed, many others have done the same, including Pope Francis, the United States Commission on International Religious Freedom, and the world's leading international association of genocide scholars. In September of this year, a resolution urging the United States to follow, naming the treatment of minorities under ISIS as genocide, was introduced to the U.S. Congress, Resolution 75. In Defense of Christians has been working hard alongside many other organizations representing a broad spectrum of Americans' political and religious communities, many of those organizations who are represented here today, to ensure that the United States government, both the Congress and the State Department, do exactly that. At our recent National Leadership Convention in September, the day following the announcement of Genocide 75, hundreds of Middle Eastern Christians, American citizens, canvassed the halls of Congress, visiting over 200 offices in support of the resolution. To date, over 150 members of the House of Representatives have co-signed this initiative. Today we're gathered to take a deeper look at both the scope and the implications of this important American policy. We have brought to the table some of the nation's most recognized leaders on the topic to guide us through this conversation. We will hear brief remarks from each of our panel members and then open the floor for questions and answers.
Thank you, Mr. Kirsten. It's an honor to be part of this gathering today, and appreciate IDC inviting us to be a part of this. 18 months ago, my wife and I were at a meeting in Izmir, Turkey, and we were sitting at a table with a pastor from Syria, a pastor from Iraq, and a pastor from Lebanon. And the pastor from Syria looked across the table at us and he said, "They're killing our men, they're raping our women, and they're burning our churches, and the church in the West doesn't even care. Why?" Well, that was a question that we couldn't dodge, and it was a part of a conversation that led me and my wife to join with some others to start the 21st Century Wilberforce Initiative to try to awaken the churches in America to these atrocities that are taking place. And now, because of ISIS, we have never been closer to seeing the end of Christianity in the Middle East than we are today. For almost 18 months, we've watched in horror as ISIS has committed and broadcast atrocity after atrocity against Iraq and Syria's ethnic and religious minorities. Now, with the administration finally poised to designate some of those who have been victims of ISIS as genocide, there exists now the grave and palpable and growing concern that many of the communities that have been deliberately targeted by ISIS will be left out of such a designation. Our team, the 21st Century Wilberforce Initiative, conducted a fact-finding trip to Iraq earlier this year. We were overwhelmingly convinced that what was happening to the Yazidis and the Christians and other religious minorities was nothing less than genocide. There was no end to the horrific stories that were told us by these people. We interviewed at least 75 people who had been driven out of their lands by ISIS, including two 18-year-old Yazidi girls who had been held captive by ISIS for 100 days. They told horrific things that had happened to them, and one night they decided that they'd rather risk death than to stay there any longer. We also heard a woman tell about how her infant child was snatched from her lap and never to see that child again. And when these kidnappers were leaving her, they turned and said, "We're going to raise your child as a jihadist." We talked to a man who was accompanied by his 8-year-old son living in horrible conditions in an IDP camp, tell how he watched his wife die from cancer when she was refused treatment unless she was willing to renounce her faith in Jesus Christ. A member of our team just came back this week from Iraq, and she informed us that the situation is only grown. She heard stories about how forced conversions by Sharia courts, young women who were denied the option to pay the tax and sold into slavery, and several refugees who haven't heard from their family members who remained back in ISIS-controlled territory, haven't heard from them since September. As of Monday of this week, reports now indicate that ISIS is now systematically slaughtering infants and children with Down syndrome. An evil and despicable act. It rivals the horrors of the Nazi death camps. During the season of Advent, Christians around the world prepare for Christmas, the feast of the Nativity of Jesus Christ. However, if nothing is done to protect the religious minorities in Iraq and Syria and other Middle Eastern countries, within 5 years, we'll see the death of Christianity in the place of its literal birth. If history, empirical research, and practical experience have taught me anything about situations like this, it is that no sufficient action will happen until the United States has the moral courage to refer to these crimes for what they truly are: genocide. The use of the word genocide is crucial. While the United States is pledged to protect victims of genocide and crimes against humanity and war crimes and mass atrocities, this is a protection that's been more in theory than actually in practice. The administration has to use this word and they must use it for all targeted communities. Genocide is the intent to destroy in whole or even in part a people group. And by taking action and addressing just the refugee situation, rather than destroying ISIS, we're helping to destroy the presence of these communities in their ancient homelands. Put simply, genocide is a word that's going to awaken the world. Historically, our failure to use this this term in a time of needless loss of millions of people who were killed in Cambodia and Rwanda and Bosnia, every single one of those, the United States government has failed its strategic and moral imperative to prevent, end, and punish the crimes of genocide. The shadows of the past are upon us once again. Time is urgent, the hour is late. For the sake of justice, the survival of these groups, and the United States' moral responsibility as a leader, the administration must move swiftly to designate the Christian, Yazidi, and other religious and ethnic minorities of Iraq and Syria as victims of genocide by ISIS. We believe that atrocities can still be prevented, lives can still be saved, justice can still be done, but only if the administration acts quickly and will act definitively. Thank you.
I just want to thank, first of all, In Defense of Christians and the 21st Century Wilberforce Initiative and others who have really led the way on this campaign. When I first went to Iraq in 2007, when I was elected president of the International Association of Genocide Scholars, it was to Kurdistan, to a place where the U.S. had still not recognized the genocide against the Kurdish people by Saddam Hussein, a genocide that included gassing of people in Halabja and many other places. Probably at least 100,000 people were murdered in that genocide. So the word genocide is nothing new in Iraq. So why does the word matter? Why does the G word matter? Why not simply call ISIS crimes against Christians and others crimes against humanity? After all, genocide is a crime against humanity. It's just the worst one, because the attempt to wipe out an entire people group actually impoverishes all of humanity. And that's why Raphael Lemkin invented this new word, genocide, which means the killing of a nation or a people. The reason the words matter is that genocide is much more powerful than crimes against humanity, war crimes, ethnic cleansing, or these ill-defined terms like, quote, atrocity crimes. These don't even have any legal definition in international law. Ethnic cleansing doesn't exist in international law, nor does atrocity crimes. Whereas genocide is actually in a convention. And so are crimes against humanity, of course, in the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court. Well, the reason why the word genocide matters is because words matter. People act according to words. In 2007, 3 epidemiologists and I counted the number of times the words genocide and ethnic cleansing were used in the New York Times, law journals, UN press releases, and statements by Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch to describe 4 recent genocides: Bosnia, Rwanda, Kosovo, and Darfur. And we discovered that as long as ethnic cleansing was used to describe these situations, there was no forceful action to stop them. As soon as the situations were called genocide, forceful action resulted and ended the killing, except in one case, in Darfur. where a UN Commission of Inquiry rejected the genocide word, the G word, especially to counter the finding of a Commission of Inquiry of the United States government, which did define that, what was happening in Darfur as genocide. That's a really good example of how much it matters. Now, genocide is defined in the Genocide Convention as, and I just quote, because let's get it straight here, any of the following acts committed with the intent to destroy in whole or in part a national, ethnic, racial, or religious group as such. Killing members of the group, causing bodily or mental harm to members of the group, deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part, preventing births within the group, and forcibly transferring children of the group to another group. I mean, what Reverend has described to us as taking away babies is genocide. It's direct. It's genocide. Now, what do you have to do to prove genocide? First, you have to prove intent. You have to prove intent to destroy the group in whole or in part. And frequently, the in part is forgotten. You know, many people who talk about genocides think that the only model for it is the Holocaust or Rwanda or the Armenian genocide, where the objective was to destroy everybody. Well, the attempt to destroy a part of a group is enough. And how do you prove intent? There are two ways. You can either prove it through direct statements of leaders of the group. You very seldom get them, by the way. You know, Hitler never said, well, we're going to wipe out all the Jews, unless you read way back into Mein Kampf. Once Winston Churchill was asked, why is it that you seem to understand, Hitler and the Nazis, whereas Chamberlain and the others didn't? And he said, well, I read Mein Kampf and I really took him seriously. I figured he would actually do what he said he was going to do. Well, we should take seriously what ISIS is saying it is going to do. The other way to prove intent is you can infer the intent from a systematic pattern of acts that demonstrate a policy or a plan to destroy a group. And that is the main way that genocide is proved, that the intent to commit genocide is proven in courts, and that we can infer also from the acts of ISIS. The second thing you have to prove is simply the commission of the acts that are listed in the definition of genocide. And every single one of these acts that is listed has been committed by ISIS against Yazidis, Christians, Sabea Mandaeans, against Shia Muslims, and against other religious minorities in Iraq and Syria. ISIS has targeted all of these groups. So these are strong proof of ISIS's intent to destroy in whole or in part these religious and ethnic groups. They have openly declared their intent to kill every Yazidi male and to enslave every Yazidi female because they think that the Yazidis are devil worshippers. You know, they're outside the pale of even humanity. But they also have said that Christians, unless they will convert, should either pay a tax, that is a Yazidi tax, or convert to Islam and and if they won't, they'll be slaughtered. Well, unfortunately, a recent report by the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum concluded that this jizya tax meant that there wasn't the intent to kill everybody who was Christian. Well, the problem with that is the jizya tax for ISIS is a lie. It's an ISIS lie, because they have set the tax so high that very few people can pay it. So, what happens? They can't pay it, and so they refuse to convert, to renounce Jesus Christ as their Lord and Savior, and they refuse, and they are either beheaded or, and this is the favorite punishment for Christians, they are crucified. And we have lots of photos of crucifixions. I hesitate to ask you to look at them, but they're on our website. We've got a warning, if you're not really ready to watch these, Don't watch them. Now, we have one huge advantage here. Genocide doesn't legally require forceful response, but morally it certainly does. And that's why Raphael Lemkin invented the new word. What we have proven through our studies as scholars on genocide is that the words crimes against humanity or ethnic cleansing have never compelled forceful action to this day. Whereas the word genocide not only demands, but propels forceful action to stop it. I would leave you with this thought, and this is why I think it's so important that the State Department and the President should determine that Christians, Shia Muslims, and other groups, other than Yazidis as well, and Yazidis certainly are victims of genocide as well, are targets of genocide. First of all, the word genocide more strongly justifies our broad coalition military support for Kurdish and Iraqi forces to defeat ISIS. It also justifies arming and training militias of the targeted groups for self-defense, which is always the best defense against genocide. Just ask the Israelis. The second reason is members of such groups are much more likely to receive preferential treatment as bona fide refugees. Under the UN Convention and Protocols on the Status of Refugees, to which the U.S. is a state party, and under the refugee laws of the United States, because it gives Christians and others who are being targeted for genocide the rebuttable presumption that they have a well-founded fear of persecution based on their religious or their ethnic identity. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and thanks to In Defense of Christians for organizing this conference today. Yesterday, there was a new poll out, a Marist poll, that showed that most Americans understand that there is atrocities amounting to genocide going on in Iraq and Syria, and that they acknowledge this as genocide by a very wide margin. This is a poll that was sponsored by the Knights of Columbus. The Pope Francis, the Independent U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom, and many other prominent and expert voices have spoken out and said this is genocide. So why hasn't the administration? On December 4th, a letter went to Secretary Kerry that I helped organize. It was signed by 30 prominent religious freedom experts and religious heads, asking for an opportunity to brief the Secretary of State on the genocide of Christians in the Middle East. It was asking for a meeting. To date, there has been no response. That was over 10 days ago. This was a letter that was signed by Cardinal Wuerl, by the head of the Assembly of God, by the spokesman for the Southern Baptist Convention, by the head of the Knights of Columbus, the dean of the Episcopal Cathedral at St. John the Divine in New York, by Anglican bishops, by scholars such as Princeton and USERF's Robert George, Harvard Law School's Marianne Glendon, Katrina Lantis Sweat, and so forth. No response. So what is the evidence? The other speakers have already given many other examples. I will just give a few. And it's important to note that the genocide occurred or started against Christians long before ISIS appeared. It started by, in fact, ISIS's predecessor organization, Al-Qaeda in Iraq. And we saw the churches being destroyed and blown up then, including in 2010, Our Lady of Salvation Church in Baghdad, filled with worshipers, blown up. About 50 were killed and the rest were wounded among the worshipers. A convoy of students, of Christian students in the Nineveh Plain traveling by a school bus to attend the University of Mosul. They were blown up as well in 2010. More recently, many of the deaths of Christians over time in both countries resulted from or preceded by kidnappings and then their murders. Women are not excluded from slavery, sexual enslavement. We know of 3 Christian women and girls who were sold on Mosul slave markets. ISIS, in its magazine Dabiq, celebrates this ability to enslave Christian women in Nigeria. It points to Nigeria and the Philippines as examples. The Melkite Catholic Bishop of Aleppo, Archbishop Jumbar, said that just this fall that over 1,000 Christians have been kidnapped and murdered in his city of Aleppo alone. Most recently, we saw the executions of 3 Assyrian Christian men dressed in orange jumpsuits with a gun to their head, executed. They identified themselves as, I am an Assyrian Christian. ISIS then, that was broadcast on publicized on a ISIS video. And they promised to execute 200 others unless $10 million was paid. That they have, the 200 that they already have captive. On August 28th, the Christian Aid Mission in Charlottesville, Virginia, just a few miles down the road from here, said that some of the indigenous pastors and preachers they work with in Syria were murdered. They were beheaded and crucified on August 28th outside of Aleppo. These were Protestant or evangelical preachers who refused to renounce their faith. They were converts from Islam, and they first took the preacher's 12-year-old boy and sliced off his fingertips. When the father refused to renounce his own faith, they beat the son. And then when he still refused, they crucified the son in front of the father, and then they went on to crucify the father. Several women in the next town over were also taken, and they were raped in the public square, and then they were beheaded. So that was on August 28th. Some say that, as Dr. Stanton pointed out, that the jizya tax is an option for the Christians. That is a tax that's meant to humiliate Christians, to make them know their place as subservient people, and to, over time, convert them to Islam through the pressure of it. And we know that, and the contract, this tax contract, the dhimmi contract, is to provide protection and the right to worship in exchange. In fact, ISIS provides neither. And we know this because the tax has been applied, the jizya has been applied both in Raqqa and in Mosul. There is no evidence of any open Christian activity in either of those cities today. All the churches are closed or destroyed or been converted to mosques in those 2 cities. The Raqqa is being slaughtered silently website talks about this just in the past week, about how there's no evidence of priests or masses or liturgies or any kind of religious service. There was a public Bible burning in Raqqa when ISIS took over. In fact, the administration's, just until a few months ago, the administration's, State Department's counterterrorism expert, Ambassador Alberto Fernandez, calls the jizya under ISIS, quote, a Wahhabi Salafi publicity stunt. And again, in most cases, there is no even jizya option offered, so-called option offered. As Dr. Stanton said, when the money runs out, then the children, the lives are taken in, and property are taken anyhow. And we have examples of that from Syria. Certainly, the Jesuits, Father Franz van der Loot, Father Paolo Adolio, the two Orthodox bishops, Armenian and Orthodox priests, et cetera, Father Ghana in Mosul, who was shot for not closing his church. None of these people had a jizya option at all. So, let me just conclude by saying that, yes, genocide, calling it genocide does matter. It matters for resettlement purposes. It matters for restitution of property and losses at land, for land and territory, for reparations for property and losses. And also, as a lawyer, I consider it not insignificant that this solemn vow after the Holocaust of never again would we allow, the civilized world allow a genocide to continue unacknowledged and unabated, be allowed. I think that is extremely important to uphold this justice, this principle of justice. And if we don't in this case, it will be hollowed out and drained of all meaning. It will be dead letter. Thank you very much. Let me just end one more thing to say. President Obama, Secretary Kerry, Samantha Power, Ambassador Power, Susan Rice, where are you? Where are your voices? And Speaker Paul Ryan, please bring Resolution 75 to a vote right away. Thank you.
Good morning. The peace of Christ be with you. It's important to say something like that in this Advent season, as we remember a baby born to die on a cross. A baby whose first experience one of his first experiences was to flee a genocidal king as a refugee. This is our context, and this is the basis of our faith, that he was who he says he is, and therefore we have to do as he does. It's obviously a very serious issue. I'm grateful for IDC and our panelists for sharing the facts and laying out the context and the parameters of what is taking place. I work for an organization that believes God has given us, a gift-giving God has given us some serious gifts. He's made us in his image. He's given us the freedom of conscience or belief. And he's given us Christ, a chance to choose Christ or reject Christ. And so we work worldwide for people of all faiths and none as a function of that belief to contribute to society in all sectors and all spheres, to demonstrate that people of faith, or no faith at all, can contribute to the well-being and flourishing of society and therefore the security and the stability of the state, all because they have an opportunity to protect or to choose, reject, change, share their faith as they wish. Obviously, that is not the case in the Middle East, and particularly in Iraq and Syria, and that is part of the cause of all the problems that we are facing. Toward these ends, over the last 10 plus years, I've been engaging in going to the Middle East on a regular basis. In the last 14 months in particular, our Middle East program, the Cradle Fund, has been to the Middle East 7 times. We've identified and worked with and through 13 partners to help 120,000 plus people in 5 different countries, to help rescue, restore, and return Christians and other ethnic and religious groups to their ISIS-fled homes. And whether one agrees or not with the strategy we have taken of rescue, restore, and return, it is important to have a strategy. You don't hear a lot of talk about strategies. And it's important to have a strategy that transcends paradigms and transcends different approaches, because all the different approaches in their respective silos are broken. You have to blend reconciliation with conflict resolution, with the church, the role of the church, with what do governments do in military strategies and relief and development. It's not any of these, it's all of these together. And so we try to work in a rescue phase to help with the relief issues and help get people through a winter or a second winter as it is, and restore phase to look at issues of trauma and education, and return phase to be bold enough to have a dream that we can and will defeat ISIS and be able to return people to the homes they fled. Now, we recognize, especially as Christians, that Christians and other ethnic and religious groups have not suffered the most statistically. Muslims have suffered the most at the hands of ISIS, and we need to be clear about that and understand that. But precisely because ethnic and religious groups are so small because of a soft drip of genocide over the last century, those groups will soon suffer no more because they will be no more. And that's what we're dealing with here today. And by the way, not only is caring about genocide the right thing to do, it's in everybody's interest to do so. When there is less ethnic and religious minorities in any given culture, when there is less religious freedom, there's less political stability, there's less economic development, there's less women's empowerment. And in the case of Christians in particular, there is less opportunity for Christian majority countries to engage that region and understand that region as it understands itself. So it's in everybody's interest, and it's the right thing to do to protect and preserve Christians and other ethnic religious minorities in the Middle East, and to practice the first part of wisdom, which is to name something properly. Destroy in part or in whole is what is taking place with Christians and other ethnic and religious groups. It's just that simple. So what are we going to do? One, we've got to declare genocide and increase the probability that the Western nations in the world will act to protect these people. But then the next step is, what will they do when they act? Another military strategy without thought for strategy in the aftermath only makes the situation worse, only invites the zombie son of ISIS.
Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you to each one of you that are here. And I understand that our former colleague, Frank Wolf, was here earlier. We all salute him. I think the foundation that he built and the work that he did in the Congress, we stand on his shoulders. And so I wanted to acknowledge him. I want to acknowledge the In Defense of Christians for your work in organizing this important event, and certainly to my extraordinary co-chair of the Religious Minorities Caucus, Congressman Jeff Fortenberry, and of course our colleague Chris Smith, I understand, was here. He got here before the vote, so obviously to the panel of experts, to all of the advocates. This is an issue that I think befits who and what we are by speaking out and calling what is going on in the Middle East exactly what it is, a genocide. A genocide. And so the work of the caucus is very important on this, and certainly the work of the experts that have been so instructive to us. Earlier this month, USA Today columnist Kirsten Powers cited an account in the Middle East that I think is almost beyond comprehension. She wrote the following, and I'm quoting, "In October of this year, Islamic State militants in Syria demanded that 2 Christian women and 6 men convert to Islam. When they refused, the women were publicly raped and then beheaded along with the men. On the same day, militants cut off the fingertips of a 12-year-old boy in an attempt to force his Christian father to convert. When his father refused, they were brutalized and crucified." This is systematic extermination of religious minorities across the Middle East, including those who share the same heritage I do. I am of Armenian and Assyrian descent. This is history for my family that is repeating itself all over again. And the unfortunate deep, deep sadness of this is that the lens is very broad. It not only includes those from whom I claim my nationality, but so many others as well. These are barbaric acts by ISIS. They certainly include torture, they certainly include murder, and it includes the displacement of millions of Christians and other ethnic and religious minorities, and it must be stopped. Our caucus, which I'm very, very proud of, starting out with just a band of really dedicated individuals, but a small group, but with a good, strong voice, has grown. And this effort is bipartisan. And we have brought forward a genocide resolution. We have worked in defense of Christians and others to make sure that the resolution is all-inclusive, that it has the accuracy that it deserves, because each group, a stakeholder, is precious to us, and their voices matter. But an official statement of the United States of America must also be made to label these atrocities carried out against all of these groups and individuals for what they are, and that is genocide. That is genocide. This is a major step to take, but it must be identified as that. I want to make you aware of something that I think is really very important, and that is the Knights of Columbus, and I salute them because they ran full-page ads in newspapers in support of our resolution. And they worked with the Marist poll organization that then did a poll of the American people. And the result of that poll that just came out is that 55% of Americans believe the targeting of Christians and other religious minorities in the Middle East by ISIS meets the UN definition of genocide. So you see the decency, the respect is deeply embedded in the American people. So all it takes is the political will. And I'm very proud that we have garnered, I believe, 167 bipartisan co-sponsors of the resolution. I want to thank all of you for your role in this, because it takes building step by step. And we are, when I say we, both Congressman Fortenberry, myself, everyone that is part of the effort, we want you to know that that we are enormously grateful to the advocates for the work that you have done to help bring us to this point. But we are not done yet. We will not be satisfied until we grow our numbers on a bipartisan basis on the resolution. But I think that this is a time where future generations, I believe, will measure ours. Did they speak out? Did they recognize this and say so? I think here at home, we take for granted so many things. But go abroad, anywhere, and what you are made acutely aware of is that everything we say and do here matters. People listen from across the globe. People read, people talk, people analyze what the United States of America and its people are saying. So I wish we didn't have to work on something like this. But it calls for action of the Congress and the speaking out of the Congress of the United States on behalf of the American people. This poll, this Marist poll, demonstrates that 55% of the American people agree that we should that this indeed fits the UN definition of genocide. So more than anything else, I'm here to thank all of you for the work that you're doing. And I think the blessings of your work will be shared by those that can't help but think that they are forgotten right now. And that in our day, in our time, that we can do something that's extraordinarily noble. Thank you to all of you.
Thank you, Tufi. Thank you all for coming, and I want to thank my good friend Anna Eshu for her profound remarks. She's exactly right. It is sometimes surprising to us in Congress as to the moral authority that we do have when we simply utter what is true. And in this case, Anna and I, along with many others, have introduced a resolution calling what has happened to the Christians, Yazidis, and other religious minorities in the Middle East a genocide. When you are being persecuted simply because of what you believe, when you are systematically targeted for execution, there's no reason to continue to discuss this ad infinitum. That is genocide. That is an assault on the dignity of persons. It's an assault on the dignity of the collective morality of humanity. It is an assault on civilization itself. The other night I was reading an article, and I don't recall where I saw this photo, but I wanted to show it to you all again. These were the Coptic Christians from Egypt who were martyred in Libya at the hands of ISIL. Again, those of us who have invested in this issue, those of us who have tried to raise international consciousness on this issue, even us, we can get lulled into complacency. We have been talking about this for months and months, and now we understand the State Department might be on the verge of issuing a genocide resolution that does not include Christians. And the administration initially did not call what happened to these men martyrdom because of their Christianity. They were supposedly killed because they were Egyptians. However, the administration did correct itself, to their credit. Put yourself in these men's position. If you were being persecuted for your faith, even to the point of death, what would be going through your mind? The terror or the reconciliation, or both, with God at this final moment. This is what's happening day in and day out. This is why we cannot let ourselves become embroiled in unnecessary academic talk. We have to act. And the idea that Anna and I and many others conceived of is simply calling this what it is, a genocide, with the first priority of raising international consciousness so that then a gateway could take place for further action, which is complicated, I get that. Security action, political settlements, migration, and all of the other attending problems. But the first priority is to call it what it is, and to put ourselves in the shoes of people who are being horrifically persecuted and embrace their pain, to stand with them. That's the definition of compassion. When, as Anna so well put it, when the United States leads, when it says the words, it means things. So thank you all for your deep interest, particularly the panel who has showed extreme courage and diligence and leadership on this question, because this is more than the horror of religious persecution of one group. It is about civilization itself. Thanks.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to thank IDC's partner organizations, our distinguished speakers and members of Congress for their remarks on Christians' genocide in Iraq and Syria. My name is Sloy Mikhail, and I am a Christian from Iraqi Kurdistan. I currently serve as the Iraqi advisor for IDC. I have served Iraqis, Christians, as the head of Foreign Relations Committee of the Chaldean Syrian Popular Council, representing the Christians community in Iraq and advocating for their rights within Iraq and Kurdistan. I would like to tell you the story of my people and the ongoing persecutions. Iraqi Christians are ethnically Assyrian Chaldean Syriac, and our ancestral roots in modern-day Iraq and Syria reach back 7,000 years of the civilization of Mesopotamia, 5,000 years before the birth of Christianity, and almost 6,000 years before the emergence of the Islam. In 2003, Iraqi Christians were an estimated 1.5 million, roughly 3% of the total Iraqi population. We were integrated members of the greater Iraqi society, contributing to our nation as leaders of business, entrepreneurs, political figures, teachers, doctors, engineers, scholars, and roughly every other sector of Iraqi society. But in 2004, after the American invasion of Iraq, many of our Arab countrymen began to identify Iraqi Christians with the West's intervention of Iraq. Our Christians' identity caused us to be quickly identified with the Iraqis' Western enemies, a place we have called our own for thousands of years. We suddenly became looked upon as outsiders. A sectarian violence across Iraqi increased. Iraqi Christians became an easy scapegoat for animosity toward the West. Even before the rise of ISIS, 20,000 Christian families had migrated from Basra, Baghdad, and Mosul to the Nineveh Plain and Kurdistan to escape persecution. Many more Christians, victims of persecution, unable to find work or to sustain their families, or fearful of threats and uncertain future, left Iraq. By 2006, the Christian population of Iraq had shrunk to 800,000 people. The persecution intensified, and between 2004 to 2010, over 2,500 Christians were killed throughout Iraq as victims of Christian-targeted sectarian violence. In the Nineveh Plain, Christian communities continue to be the target of Islamic radicals who resent their presence in the region of Christianity's historical roots there. In the summer of 2014, ISIS took over Mosul, the second largest city in Iraq, targeting Christians in Nineveh Plain and Yazidis in Sinjar. Hundreds of thousands of Christians and Yazidis fled their homes and towns for the ISIS brutality to Kurdistan region for safety and shelter. Over 118 churches were torn to the ground. Monasteries were attacked. Christians' cemeteries were desecrated and convents were raided. Nuns, religious leaders, bishops, priestesses, and deacons were publicly beheaded. Almost 65,000 Christian families fled for fear of death from ISIS. Those who stayed were told that they could either pay the Islamic tax that was far outside of the economic means of any Christian family in the region, convert to Islam, or be beheaded. Christians, Yazidis, and other religious minorities had all of their property seized, their money and life savings stolen, and their girls, women, and their children abducted, never to be seen again. To this day, there are 40 Christian families from Mosul were taken by ISIS that are still missing. Mass executions of our communities took place. Now, the Christian community in Iraq is less than 300,000 people. ISIS has not hesitated to declare to the world that it has waged a war on the nation of the cross, beheading Coptic Christians, Ethiopian Christians, and Assyrian Christians before the global public simply because they would not convert to Islam. On August 7, 2014, Iraqi parliament held a session denouncing ISIS for committing atrocities and crimes against religious minorities. The Iraqi parliament recognized this as a genocide. The daily average of Christian families fleeing Iraq is about 17 to 20 families. Yet, despite the persecution they faced, many bold believers are determined to stay so the Christians' presence in their country might continue. There are Iraqi Christians like Maysar al-Qaspatrus, who was quoted by the New York Times as saying, "We must die here. We cannot leave this country. If we don't do anything urgently, Iraq will be empty from the Christians. We must stop this Christian genocide in Iraq and Syria." Thank you so much for listening.
A faithful Christian social witness must prioritize advocacy on behalf of religious liberty for all people everywhere at all times. The Christian affirmation of universal human rights, starting with religious freedom, is premised on the understanding of all persons as equally image bearers of God, which accords an intrinsic human dignity that every society seeking justice, decency, and peace should respect. Without religious liberty, all other freedoms and human rights are vulnerable. The ongoing horrors in Syria and Iraq under the Islamic State terribly illustrate this truth, as religious minorities are brutalized and murdered because of their faith. That this targeting of religious groups for destruction is genocide should be self-evident to all. Unfortunately, Christian social witness in America of late on international religious liberty, and particularly the Mideast situation, has been uneven. Some, including the Catholic bishops and Southern Baptists, have been courageously forthright, specifying that Christian victims of ISIS should be recognized as victims of genocide. But there has been a widespread silence or maybe confusion on this issue within much of Christian conversation and advocacy. There has been a lot of Christian focus on one part of the Syrian refugee issue, which is certainly very important, but American Christians are versatile enough to cover multiple issues at the same time. Advocating for Mideast Christians should be a priority for American Christians. Why this reluctance by Christians to advocate for Christians? There may be an underlying concern among some American Christians that specific advocacy on behalf of fellow Christians may seem self-serving and parochial. Hence, there is often more comfort in addressing human rights and religious liberty generically for all people without specific reference to Christians. But affirmation of religious freedom for all should not preclude specific citation of Christians, especially when Christians are a chief targeted group, as they are in the Mideast. And here is an important theological point. Christians have a divine command to demonstrate love for their brothers and sisters in faith. We are told that the church is one body, and that when any part of that body suffers, all share in that suffering. Christians best demonstrate love to the world when they show the care they have for each other. If Christians cannot publicly stand with persecuted Christians, we are a poor witness to the world, like a dysfunctional family that tells others how to live, but is indifferent about our own children, spouse, and parents. Hopefully, Christians in America will increasingly rise to the occasion to confront the genocide perpetrated by ISIS and encourage our nation to address this evil. Many already are, and their solidarity with the persecuted is a sacred work that never really ends. Thank you.
Well, first and foremost, I appreciate this effort and all the effort that's being made by people throughout this country and throughout the world to try to save millions, several million people who are targeted today for slaughter and extinction by an evil force. That evil force happens to hate all of us, but they have targeted especially the Christians in the Middle East. It is up to us, whether we're Christians, Jews, Muslims, or atheists, but are moral human beings on this planet, to take a stand right now, together. This issue of saving the Christians and the Yazidis from genocide should cross all the lines of decency and humanity, and draw us together with people of many different ideas of the way things should be structured spiritually and how law should be structured. But all of us should agree that this type of contemplated slaughter of people for their religion in an attempt to terrorize the rest of the world, I might add, is not only not acceptable, but it is something we need to stand together and act against. I have a piece of legislation, as you know, which is 4017, HR 4017, which would at least take a step in the right direction, which says that of those refugees and immigrants coming from these troubled areas, that Christians should have the priority and Yazidis should have the priority, because we have officially, which my bill does, acknowledges them as targets of genocide. And there is no reason the president said, oh, we don't have a religious test. This is not a religious test. This is similar to if the Jews who came here seeking refuge in 1939, it was sinful for Christians and everybody else to send those Jews back because we're not going to do any favors for them because of their religion. We wouldn't have been doing favors to them. They were targeted for genocide. Helping, it's a lifeguard that goes out and saves someone who is drowning isn't playing favors by having his attention on them rather than on all the swimmers who may be in a current but aren't in trouble at that moment. We are the lifeguards of this planet. The decent people of this world have to work together to save those who are about to drown. And it's worse than drowning because they save those who are about to be slaughtered by other evil people. So it's up to us. We need to activate throughout every religion and every ethnic group. And as I say, even atheists should be with us on this, because this is an historic moment. We look back on the genocide, on the Holocaust against the Jews, and we know that was an historic moment that we could have stopped, and we didn't. And it is a black mark on humanity that we didn't. We can't let that happen again to these poor Christians and Yazidis who are now targeted by this evil force of radical Islamic terrorism in the Middle East. So I join with you in solidarity. I will be active. I'm going to try to activate as many people as we can. This Christmas season in particular, let us remember those Christians and the Yazidis who are now, they're in fear for their very existence. And let us reach out to them and reach out to others and not permit another Holocaust to happen. So thank you all very much. Good to be with you.